Thomas Guy Cleveland. On the evening of June 17, 1966, Disneyland was alive with the energy of a grad night celebration when high school seniors from across Southern California filled the park for an all-night party. Among those who turned up that night was 19-year-old Thomas Guy Cleveland, a resident of Northridge, California. Unlike the thousands of students who entered through the gates, Cleveland attempted to sneak inside without a ticket. To do so, he scaled Disneyland's 16-foot outer fence and climbed onto the elevated monorail track. A security guard stationed nearby spotted Cleveland on the track and immediately began shouting warnings. The guard urged him to get down, warning that a train was fast approaching. Cleveland, however, continued forward. As the train drew closer, he made an attempt to climb down onto a fiberglass canopy positioned just below the track, but the clearance was too low. Moments later, the monorail bore down on him. The impact threw him down the track, and the train dragged his body between 30 and 40 feet before coming to a stop. He was killed instantly. The incident became the first fatal accident tied to Disneyland's monorail system. Deborah Gail Stone. On July 8, 1974, only 9 days after it opened, 18-year-old Deborah Gail Stone was working inside Disneyland's America Sings attraction when tragedy struck. At 10:37 p.m., as the rotating theatre walls shifted during a brief intermission, she became trapped in the narrow space between the stationary stage wall and the moving partition that turned every few minutes to reset the scenes. Whether she had stepped back by mistake, attempted to cross between sections, or was the victim of inadequate training was never determined. Guests reported hearing screams, but some assumed they were part of the show. When staff finally responded to an alert from an audience member, it was too late. Stone had been fatally crushed and was pronounced dead at 11 p.m. Her parents later filed a lawsuit and received a modest settlement. In the immediate aftermath, Disney closed America Sings, installing warning lights, new carpeting, and breakaway wall panels designed to prevent such an accident from happening again. Dolly Regina Young. On January 3, 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Regina Young boarded the Matterhorn Bobsleds at Disneyland and took a seat alone in the rear of her sled. As the ride climbed and then began its high-speed descent through the mountain's winding tunnels, something went wrong. Midway through the run, Young became unfastened from her seatbelt and was thrown from the sled onto the track. Moments later, another bobsled struck her, killing her instantly. Investigators later discovered her restraint undone, but it was never determined whether she had unbuckled it, whether it failed, or if another factor was to blame. The accident, one of the park's most grisly, prompted a wrongful death lawsuit from her estranged husband and 2 adult sons, who sought $5 million in damages. The case was quietly settled in March 1988, just before trial, with terms kept confidential. In response, Disneyland replaced the Matterhorn's older friction-style lap belts with sturdier snap-in buckles, part of a broader effort to strengthen ride safety procedures in the years following the tragedy. Luan Phi Dawson. Luan Phi Dawson, a 33-year-old computer programmer, was spending Christmas Eve 1998 at Disneyland with his wife and young son. That night, they boarded the sailing ship Columbia, an 18th-century replica that carried guests around the rivers of America. As the vessel returned to dock, it came in too fast. A cast member, who had not been fully trained, tied the mooring line to a metal cleat on the ship's wooden hull. The line, normally made of inelastic hemp, had been replaced with nylon rope, which stretched instead of snapping. Under the strain, the cleat tore free and was hurled into the crowd. It struck Dawson and his wife, as well as a nearby cast member. Dawson suffered catastrophic head injuries and died 2 days later at UCY Medical Center. Investigators from California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health determined that the employee operating the ship had not been adequately trained, and that proper procedure should have involved slowing or reversing the vessel rather than relying on the cleat. The incident also drew criticism of Disney's emergency policies, including restrictions on outside medical personnel entering the park promptly. In response, Disney reinstated lead foremen on attractions, and Anaheim police began maintaining a presence in the park to improve emergency response times. Cal OSHA fined Disney $12,500, and the company later settled a lawsuit brought by the victim's family for an estimated $25 million, making the case one of the costliest in Disneyland's history. Marcelo Torres. Marcelo Torres was a 22-year-old graphic design student from Gardena, California, known for his artistic talent and close ties to family and friends. On September 5, 2003, he visited Disneyland with plans to enjoy the park's attractions, including the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad roller coaster. During the ride, as the train entered a tunnel, a critical mechanical failure caused the locomotive to lift from the track and collide with the tunnel ceiling before crashing down onto the first passenger car. Torres, seated in that car, was fatally crushed, suffering massive blunt force trauma and internal injuries, while 10 other riders were also hurt. Investigators determined that the derailment stemmed from improper maintenance. Fasteners on the left side upstop/guide wheel of the locomotive's floating axle had not been tightened and secured according to safety specifications. As a result, the axle came loose, jammed against a brake section, and set off the deadly chain of events. Discovery by Torres' attorney confirmed his fatal injuries came when the first car was struck by the falling locomotive. Critics later pointed to Disneyland's cost-cutting maintenance culture, introduced under then-park president Paul Pressler and McKinsey and company consultants in 1997, as a contributing factor, since the new policies emphasized cost efficiency over rigorous reliability checks. The family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Disney, which was settled 3 days before trial for a confidential amount, estimated to be in the millions. Austin Wuennenberg. In the early hours of July 5, 2009, Disney World's monorail system was being repositioned for the next day's operations, a routine procedure that often required switching trains between different lines. At around 2 a.m., Monorail Pink was directed to reverse through a track switch to move from the Epcot line onto the Magic Kingdom Express line. The maneuver depended on the switch beam being correctly aligned, but that night it was not. As Monorail Pink began backing up, Monorail Purple was already on the same section of track. Within moments, the two trains collided head-on at the Transportation and Ticket Center. The impact killed Austin Wuennenberg, the 21-year-old pilot of Monorail Purple, and injured 1 employee and 6 guests who were treated at the scene and released. A subsequent National Transportation Safety Board investigation found no mechanical issues with the trains or track. Instead, it concluded that human error caused the crash. The shop panel operator had failed to properly align the switch, and a manager authorized the reverse movement without verifying its position. OSHA cited Disney for safety violations and issued $44,000 in fines, later reduced to $35,200. The system reopened the following day with new sensors and stricter operating procedures in place. Disney also placed 3 employees on administrative leave and permanently discontinued the long-standing practice of allowing guests to ride in the front cab.